The silver tray in my hands was shaking so violently that the expensive crystal glasses rattled against each other, a sound like tiny, mocking bells. I stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, my breath coming in shallow hitches. My mother, Diane, stood 10 feet away, her face a mask of cold fury as she looked at a wine stain on the white silk rug, a stain she had caused by tripping me. "You clumsy, useless girl," she hissed, her voice low so the guests wouldn't hear, yet sharp enough to pierce my heart. "You're lucky we even let you live in the attic. Clean it up, now, before the Blackwood representative arrives." I knelt, my knees hitting the hard floor, scrubbing at the rug with a cloth that felt like a bandage on a wound that wouldn't heal. I was the family servant, the unwanted child, the ghost in the hallway. But then a shadow fell over me. A man in a suit that cost more than my sister's entire college tuition stood there, looking down at me with an expression that wasn't pity, it was recognition. "Your name is Elena, isn't it?" he asked. His voice was like thunder in a quiet room. I looked up, trembling. "Yes, sir." He didn't look at Diane. He didn't look at the sprawling mansion. He looked directly into my eyes and whispered something that made the world stop spinning. "I've been looking for you for 20 years, Miss Hawthorne. It's time to stop scrubbing floors. You don't belong to these people. You owned them." It's hard to describe the feeling of being a stranger in the only house you've ever known. As I sat in the kitchen later that night, my hands red and raw from the cleaning chemicals, I listened to the laughter coming from the dining room. My sister Chloe was celebrating her new car. Diane and my father, Robert, were toasting to their perfect family. I was 22 years old, and I didn't have a birth certificate. I didn't have a passport. I had never been to a doctor. Every time I asked about my past, Diane would tell me the same story. I was the daughter of a distant, deceased relative who had left me with nothing but debt. They told me they took me in out of the kindness of their hearts, and the only way to repay that debt was to serve them. "Elena, fetch more ice," Chloe yelled at the table. I stood up, my back aching. I was treated like a tool, a piece of equipment that they could use until it broke. The conflict wasn't just the work, it was the psychological erasure. They looked through me. If I wasn't cleaning, I didn't exist. But that man's voice kept echoing in my head. Miss Hawthorne. That wasn't my last name. My last name was supposed to be Miller, the name of the poor relatives Diane claimed I came from. Why did a stranger call me Hawthorne? And why did he look at me as if I were royalty in rags? I looked at the heavy oak door leading to Robert's study. It was always locked. They told me it was because of private business. But tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw a sliver of light coming from the keyhole. The injustice of my life, the years of sleeping in a room that reached freezing temperatures in the winter, while they slept on Egyptian cotton, suddenly felt unbearable. I didn't want ice. I wanted the truth. My earliest memory isn't a hug or a birthday cake. It's the smell of lemon polish and the sound of a ticking clock. I remember being 4 or 5 years old, standing on a stool to reach the sink, washing dishes while Chloe played with dolls in the garden. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, they would love me. I remember one Christmas specifically. I was 7. I had spent weeks saving the tiny coins I found under the sofa cushions while vacuuming. I bought a small, chipped ceramic bird from a thrift shop down the road. I wrapped it in brown paper and gave it to Diane. She opened it, looked at it for a second, and then handed it to the maid to be put in the donation bin. "How sweet," she had said, not looking at me. "Now go finish the laundry, Elena. The guests are coming tomorrow, and the linens need to be crisp." I went to the laundry room and cried into the steam of the iron. That was the day I realized that my value was tied to my utility. I wasn't a daughter, I was a living, breathing insurance policy against their own laziness. Robert was different, but in a way that hurt more. He didn't yell, he just looked at me with a strange, guilty sadness. Sometimes, when Diane wasn't looking, he'd hand me an extra piece of fruit or a book he'd finished reading. But he never defended me. He never told her to stop. His silence was a betrayal that tasted like ash. I grew up in the shadows of a beautiful life I wasn't allowed to touch. I watched Chloe go to prom in a dress that cost $3,000, while I stayed home to prep the after-party snacks, wearing a hand-me-down uniform that was 2 sizes too big. I learned to be invisible. I learned that my footsteps should never make a sound. I learned that my voice was a nuisance. The house was a prison of velvet and gold. The gardens were lush, but I only knew them by the weeds I pulled. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, but I only knew it by the grease I scrubbed. I felt like a ghost haunting a mansion of the living. I often wondered if my real parents, the poor cousins, actually loved me, or if I was born to be a servant. I didn't have a single photo of them, not one. Diane said they were too poor to own a camera. Even at 10 years old, that felt like a lie. The red flags started appearing more clearly as I reached my teens. I noticed that whenever a government official or a new neighbor came over, I was sent to the grocery store or told to stay in the attic until they left. "We don't want to confuse people, Elena," Diane would say, her hand gripping my shoulder a little too tight. "You're our little secret. If people knew we had a ward, they'd ask too many questions. And you wouldn't want to go to a state home, would you? You know how they treat girls like you there." The threat of the state home was the cage they kept me in. They made me believe the world outside was a predatory monster, and they were my only protectors. Then there was the mail. Once, when I was 16, I intercepted a letter addressed to the guardian of the Hawthorne estate. It had our address on it. I brought it to Robert, thinking it was a mistake. His face went pale, whiter than I had ever seen a human face turn. He snatched the letter from my hand and hid it behind him. "Don't ever touch the mail, Elena," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's dangerous. Just go back to the kitchen." That night I heard them arguing. It was the first time I heard Robert raise his voice. "She's getting older, Diane. We can't hide it forever. The lawyers are asking for a physical sighting. They're suspicious." "Then we move her to the summer house," Diane snapped. "We have worked too hard for this. Do you want to go back to that 2-bedroom apartment? Do you want to lose the club membership? She is our meal ticket, Robert. Treat her like one." I sat on the stairs, my heart pounding. Meal ticket. I didn't know what it meant then, but I knew it wasn't a term of endearment. I started noticing that their wealth didn't seem to come from Robert's job. He worked at a small firm, yet they lived like billionaires. The math didn't add up. Chloe, too, began to change. She stopped seeing me as a sister figure and started seeing me as a target. She would intentionally break things and blame me. She would spill juice on her bedsheets at 2 a.m. just to make me change them. "You're just a stray," she told me once, leaning against the doorframe while I scrubbed her bathroom floor. "Mom told me they found you in a box. You should be grateful we let you breathe the same air as us." I looked at my reflection in the toilet water I was cleaning. I didn't see a stray. I saw someone with the same eyes as the woman in the portrait in the hallway, the original owner of the house that Diane claimed was her great-aunt. The resemblance was striking, but every time I pointed it out, Diane would tell me I was being delusional and arrogant. The year I turned 22, everything shifted from neglect to desperation. The Blackwood Group, a massive investment firm, began sending representatives to the house almost weekly. They were looking for the principal heir. Diane's behavior became erratic. She started locking me in the attic whenever the doorbell rang. She stopped giving me even the small allowance she used to provide for toiletry items. I was essentially a prisoner. "We're going to have a big party," Diane announced one morning. Her eyes were bright with a feverish sort of joy. "The Blackwood Group is coming to finalize the estate transition. Chloe, you will be the star. Elena, you will be in the kitchen. You are not to be seen. If you show your face, you'll be on the street by midnight. Do you understand?" I nodded, but for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. The day before the party, I was tasked with cleaning the forbidden study. Robert had left his keys on the hallway table, an unprecedented mistake. My hands shook as I grabbed them. I entered the room, the smell of old paper and expensive tobacco hitting me. I didn't have much time. I began rifling through the desk drawers. I found ledgers, bank statements, and then a blue folder. Inside was a birth certificate. Name, Elena Hawthorne. Father, Julian Hawthorne. Mother, Madeline Hawthorne. There was also a copy of a will. Julian Hawthorne had been the wealthiest man in the state. He and his wife had died in a plane crash when their daughter was 2 years old. The will stated that the daughter was to be the sole heir to the Hawthorne fortune, including the mansion, the offshore accounts, and the family business. And then I saw it, the guardianship papers. Robert and Diane hadn't been kind relatives. They had been the estate's groundskeepers. They were supposed to be the temporary guardians until I reached 21, but they had forged documents to make it look like I had died in the crash too, or that I was mentally unfit, while they lived off the interest of my trust. They hadn't just stolen my childhood, they had stolen my identity. They were squatters in my life. I heard footsteps in the hall. I shoved the papers back, but I kept one thing, a small gold locket that was tucked in the back of the drawer. Inside was a picture of a man and a woman. They had my eyes. They had my smile. "Elena!" Diane's voice shrieked from the hallway. I slipped the locket into my pocket just as she burst in. "What are you doing in here?" she screamed, lunging at me. She slapped me across the face so hard I fell into the desk. "I told you never to enter this room." "I was just dusting, Diane," I said, my voice flat. I didn't cry. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the fire in my soul. "Get out! Get to the attic! You stay there until the party starts tomorrow. You'll eat when I say you eat." She pushed me out and locked the door, but she didn't realize that she hadn't just locked me in, she had locked the truth in with me. I spent the night in the dark, clutching that locket, watching the stars through the tiny attic window. I wasn't Elena Miller, the servant. I was Elena Hawthorne, and tomorrow I was going to take my house back. The morning of the party was a blur of activity. Even from the attic, I could hear the caterers, the florists, and the musicians. I was let out of my cell at noon only to prep the heavy silver platters. "Remember," Diane whispered, her breath smelling of gin, "not a word. You are a server. If anyone asks, you are a temporary hire from an agency. Use a fake name." I nodded, keeping my head down, but I had a plan. While the family was upstairs getting dressed, the stranger from the Hook arrived early. He wasn't a guest, he was Arthur Sterling, the head of the Blackwood Group. He had been suspicious for years. He had known my father. I was in the hallway carrying a stack of towels when we collided. That's when the moment from the Hook happened. "Your name is Elena, isn't it?" When he told me I owned them, I felt a surge of electricity. "They told me I was nobody," I whispered, tears finally breaking through. Arthur Sterling looked around the opulent hallway with disgust. I suspected Robert was skimming, but I never imagined this. "I was told you were in a private school in Switzerland, being treated for fragile health. They've been sending us forged reports for a decade." "I've never left this property," I said. "I've been their maid." Arthur's jaw tightened. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet. "We have the final audit tonight. They think they are signing over the last of the trust's control to their family corporation. They don't know I've already contacted the authorities." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "They want a show. Diane loves an audience. Let's give them one. If we just arrest them now, the neighbors will think it's a tax issue. I want them to know exactly who I am." Arthur smiled, a cold, predatory smile. You really are Julian's daughter. He always preferred a dramatic reveal over a quiet settlement. What do you need? I need a dress and 30 minutes of silence. Arthur made a phone call. Within 20 minutes, a woman snuck into the back entrance with a garment bag. She led me to a guest room that Diane never used. I stripped off the stained apron and the gray, tattered dress. I scrubbed the grime from my fingernails. I put on a gown of deep emerald silk. It fit like a second skin. The woman did my hair and makeup, erasing the servant and revealing the heir. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. I looked powerful. I looked like the woman in the locket. The party starts in 10 minutes, the woman said. Mr. Sterling is waiting at the podium. I tucked the locket, my only real inheritance, around my neck. I was ready. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I had to wait in the guest room while the house filled with the elite of the city. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the hum of high society gossip, and the orchestra playing a light Vivaldi piece. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every time I heard Diane's high, fake laugh, I wanted to burst out and scream. 10 minutes to go. I thought about all the times I had been hungry while they threw away whole lobsters. I thought about the winter I had pneumonia, and Diane told me to stop coughing so loud because she had a bridge club meeting. 5 minutes to go. Robert would be at the front, looking nervous. He was a coward, always had been. He probably thought he could just sign the papers and finally be free of the lie. He didn't realize that the lie was the only thing holding up his world. Arthur Sterling entered the room. It's time, Elena. The documents are on the table. The cameras are rolling for the estate's historical archive. They think it's a puff piece for a magazine. Is the police presence confirmed? I asked. They are at the perimeter, Arthur said. As soon as the fraud is admitted on camera, they move in. I took a deep breath. Let's go. We walked toward the grand ballroom. I stayed behind the heavy velvet curtains near the stage. I could see Diane standing there, glowing in a gold dress that probably cost 5 years of my servant wages. Chloe was next to her, looking bored, checking her reflection in a butter knife. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice crackled over the microphone. Thank you for joining us for this momentous occasion. Today, the Hawthorne legacy officially merges with our family holdings, ensuring that this house remains a pillar of our community. The crowd applauded. My stomach turned. We want to thank our ward, Elena, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight due to her ongoing health struggles, Diane added, dabbing a fake tear from her eye. But she's with us in spirit. The audacity, I thought, the sheer sickening gall of it. Arthur Sterling stepped up to the podium. Before we sign, Robert, I believe there's one more witness we need, a witness who has been with this estate since the very beginning. A witness? Diane asked, her smile faltering. Arthur, we've cleared everyone. The lawyers have all the signatures. Not this one, Arthur said. He looked toward the curtain. Miss Hawthorne, if you please. I stepped out. The silence that hit the room was physical. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the ballroom. I saw Diane's glass slip from her hand. It shattered on the marble, red wine splashing onto her gold shoes, the same way she had tripped me earlier. Robert's face went from pale to gray to a sickly green. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Elena? Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. What? Why are you wearing that? Good evening, Diane, I said, my voice steady and cold. I walked to the center of the stage. I didn't look like a servant. I looked like the owner of the room. I believe you told everyone I was too sick to attend, or was it that I was in Switzerland? Get her out of here, Diane suddenly shrieked, her face contorting into a mask of rage. She's a maid. She's a disturbed girl we took in. She's having a psychotic break. The guests began to murmur, their faces filled with confusion and shock. Is she? Arthur Sterling asked, his voice booming. "Because this maid has a birth certificate that matches the Hawthorne lineage perfectly, and she has the DNA results we processed this afternoon from a hair sample she provided." "It's a lie," Robert stammered. We have the papers. We've been the owners for years." "You've been the caretakers, Robert," I said, stepping closer to him. "You were supposed to protect me. You were supposed to manage the estate for me. Instead, you locked me in an attic. You made me scrub the floors of the house my father built. You stole 20 years of my life." "You were nothing," Diane screamed, losing all pretense of grace. She lunged toward me, but Arthur stepped in the way. "You just were a brat we had to deal with. We deserved this house. We did the work. You were just a mistake of birth." The crowd gasped. Several people pulled out their phones, recording the meltdown. "A mistake of birth?" I asked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the locket. I held it up. "These were in the study you told me never to enter. These are my parents, and this house, this life, it was never yours." Robert looked at the cameras, then at the crowd, then at me. He broke. "I told you, Diane," he wailed, sinking to his knees. "I told you we couldn't do it. The lawyers, they were always going to find out." "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry." "Robert, shut up," Diane hissed, kicking him. But it was too late. The bad actor clause, a specific part of my father's will that I had found, was now in play. "Mr. Sterling," I said, looking at Arthur, "according to the Hawthorne Trust, what happens if the guardians are found guilty of willful negligence and fraud?" Arthur opened the folder on the podium. "The guardianship is immediately terminated. All assets currently held by the guardians, including their personal bank accounts, vehicles, and belongings, are seized by the estate as restitution, and most importantly, they are to be removed from the property immediately." "You can't do that," Chloe cried. "Where will I go? I have a tuition payment due." "You can go wherever your mother's hard work takes you, Chloe, but you're not taking the car, or the jewelry, or anything bought with Hawthorne money." The doors of the ballrooms swung open. Uniformed officers marched in. "Robert and Diane Miller?" the lead officer asked. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, identity theft, and child endangerment." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Diane was screaming as they handcuffed her, her gold dress crinkling under the pressure of the officer's grip. Robert was sobbing, apologizing to the air. Chloe was frozen, watching her world evaporate in the span of 10 minutes. I stood there, perfectly still as they were led out past the shocked elite of the city. As Diane passed me, she spat at my feet. "You'll always be a servant in your heart, Elena," she hissed. "Maybe, but I'm the servant who just fired you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and headlines. The ghost of Hawthorne Manor became the biggest story in the country. Robert took a plea deal, testifying against Diane in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's currently serving 10 years. Diane, unrepentant to the end, was sentenced to 25 years for multiple counts of fraud and what the judge called the systematic psychological torture of a minor. Chloe had to drop out of her expensive private college, since she had been an adult for several years and had actively participated in the neglect and even signed several fraudulent documents Diane pushed her way. She was given 5 years of probation and a massive restitution fine. Last I heard, she was working 2 jobs just to pay for a studio apartment. The house was mine, but it felt different now. I walked through the rooms, no longer seeing chores to be done, but a history to be reclaimed. I hired a team of historians to restore the house to how it looked when my parents were alive. I found letters my mother had written, journals my father had kept. I spent hours in the library, finally getting to know the people who had loved me for the 2 short years they were alive. The Blackwood Group remained my advisors. Arthur Sterling became the grandfather figure I never had. You have a lot of catching up to do, Elena. University, travel, the business. I want to start a foundation for children who fall through the cracks of the guardianship system. I want to make sure no one else is ever invisible in their own home. The most difficult part was the emotional fallout. Sometimes I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and instinctively reach for a scrub brush. I'd walk into the kitchen and feel a flash of panic if I saw a dish in the sink. The scars of being a servant didn't disappear overnight, but every time I felt that fear, I'd touch the locket around my neck. I'd remind myself that I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I sold most of Diane's gold furniture and donated the proceeds. I wanted the house to breathe again. I replaced the heavy velvet curtains with light, airy linen. I opened the shutters. I let the sun in. A year after the confrontation, I held a small, quiet gathering. No elite, no cameras, no fake laughter. Just Arthur, the staff I had hired, who I treated as teammates, not servants, and a few friends I had made at the local university where I was finally studying art history. We sat on the porch, the same porch where I used to scrub the stairs until my fingers bled. The smell of jasmine was thick in the air. The crickets were singing. For the first time in my life, I felt at home. I went up to the attic that evening. I hadn't been there since the night of the party. It was empty now, the dust gone, the old, tattered mattress replaced by bookshelves. I sat on the floor and looked out the window. I realized that Diane was wrong. I wasn't a servant in my heart. I was a survivor. I had been tested in a way few people ever are, and I had come out the other side not with bitterness, but with a deep, unshakable sense of self. I knew the value of $1 because I had earned pennies. I knew the value of a home because I had been a guest in my own. I knew the value of a name because mine had been stolen. I looked at the portrait of my great-aunt in the hallway as I walked back down. I smiled at her. We had the same eyes. I walked into the master bedroom, my parents' room, and lay down on the bed. The sheets were soft, but that wasn't why I was comfortable. I was comfortable because I knew that tomorrow, when I woke up, I wouldn't be waking up to a list of chores. I'd be waking up to a list of possibilities. The silence of the house was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a story that had finally found its rightful ending, or rather, its rightful beginning. I closed my eyes, the locket warm against my skin. "Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad," I whispered. "I'm home." My journey from the attic to the ballroom wasn't just about money or a big house. It was about reclaiming the truth of who I am. We all have moments where we feel invisible, where we feel like we're serving a life that isn't ours. But the truth has a way of coming to light as long as you have the courage to look for it. I want to ask you, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your past? Betrayal is one of the hardest things to overcome, especially when it comes from the people who were supposed to protect you. If you've ever had to fight for your identity or your place in the world, please share your story in the comments. We can all learn from each other's resilience. If you found this story powerful, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me bring more stories of justice and personal strength to you. Share this with someone who needs to know that their current situation isn't their final destination. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you are not what people call you. You are who you choose to be. Until next time.